This is Mindful Edge, where learning and ideas shift systems and hearts. Before we talk about rewiring and building a life beyond limits, I want to go back to the blueprint that became before the breakthrough. So, Rik, what did your life look like before you knew it needed to change?
Yeah, well, I guess the thing is that the reason that we created a company called Life Beyond Limits was because I had a multitude of limits. Growing up, I was limited in so many different ways. I wrote a book called Raw Courage, and I thought to myself, how am I going to start this book? And I decided to start the book when I was 7 years old, and I dreamed of having a bicycle. That was my big dream. Get the bike. And that was going to be my ticket to freedom. And I lived in a world that was very violent, very full of gaslighting before we knew what gaslighting was, and full of sexual exploitation, violence, depression, anxiety, you name it. So I started this book by talking about Christmas Day. Here I am with a brand new green Dragstar bike. And my dad says to me, you can ride anywhere, but not on the road. So here I am going around and round and round and round and round this block, and I can only imagine, neighbors who are watching this crazy kid going around and around the block, going, here he comes again, here he comes again, and I swear I would have gone round and round probably 30 times around this block. And then I thought to myself, I'm sick of this. This was like my life up to seven. And I thought, I'm sick of being scared. And I was scared. I was depressed, so I was anxious a lot of the time. And I can remember my biggest point of courage was I just said to myself, that's it. And I remember jumping the gutter, going on the road, and I was free. I knew I was going to get in trouble. I was going to get hit and all of that. But I just thought, no, I really want to break the rules. And that was the beginning of, for me, it was the rebel archetype. I think when you're really compressed, when you're told you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't do this, you either submit or you rebel. And I didn't submit, I rebelled. And it was a great point for me. So my life was just so I was depressed a lot of my life. I was the weird kid, but mind you, I've done lots of big talks with lots of people in a room, thousands of people in a room, and I usually say, hands up if you thought you were weird at some point in your life. And I swear every single hand in the room goes up, except the real weird people who are going, oh my God, I don't want anyone to know I'm weird. You know,
Yeah.
we all think we're weird. We really, really do. And I was filled with that, filled with fear, filled with thinking I was less. There was a lot of gaslighting around that time too. People would say things like, your nose is too big, your neck is too long, your ears are too flappy, your eyes are too this. It was nonsense. It really, really was. I'd love to see a world without that, I got to say.
Yeah, yeah. So do you feel like then you're in sort of like you're placed in a box from maybe from what your father was giving your rules and your boundaries,
Yeah.
but you were also too scared to go out of that box as well. So there was something that was driving that fear.
Yeah, very much so. I started to learn that people project fear onto other people, and I didn't know that till much later in my life when I studied psychology and the brain and all of that. And what I came to understand was that my mother and father had both been through a depression, and then they both went through World War II. My father was a soldier, a POW. And, they were constantly worried about their lives, things that most of us, in so-called peaceful times, don't actually experience. So they were so scared that they projected all their fear onto me as a kid growing up. They didn't want me to do anything risky. They didn't want me to stand out. They wanted me to conform. It was constantly, do up your buttons, tuck in your shirt. You wear shoes like this. You wear pants like that. Don't say that. Don't do this. Don't do that. What are you thinking? And then it gets worse and worse. And it was really them projecting their fear onto me. And the thing that we've got to understand is that from 0 to 7, is the imprint period. And the imprint period means that we accept everything we see and are told, and we believe that's the world. And for me, the thing that really upset me most as a kid was actually not the loss of freedom. I just accepted that. I'm a prisoner. But it was watching the comparisons, like other kids who would be given money, and go to the canteen at school and get something. And people used to really put it in my face. They go, okay, I've got all these lollies because I'm the rich kid and you're the poor kid and you have nothing. That's right. And so there was a lot of that, and I had this weird name called Schnabel, and among Smiths and Roberts and Jones and all of these real Australian type names, English type names. So there was a lot of it was a hostile time. There was a lot of Greeks, Italians, Germans, Yugoslavians, Polish people all congregating at one time. And, as there is when cultures get together, there was a lot of violence, a lot of kickback, and that was, I think I was designed perfectly for this world. I kind of started with the worst of it. But it's a little bit like when there's a lot of it's a little bit like when there's a lot of hatred directed towards you, you want to share love. When there's a lot of cruelty, you tend to build a value called kindness, and I believe in kindness. The world furnished me exactly as I was meant to be, I guess.
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's a number of unconscious patterns that you've described there that affected relationships, like with your your friends at school, or
Yeah.
not so much friends either, um, and the family dynamics, very military orientated
Yeah.
style because of what they have gone through in their life, and then the choices that you made. So from there, that sense of self that started to come from around 7, you thought,
Yeah.
and wanting that change. I'm gonna stretch my boundaries out and move forward in another way because these unconscious patterns aren't working.
Yeah, absolutely. It was something that I realized that I really wanted to do in this life is I wanted to know the boundaries of how far I could go. And I remember scaring the crap out of my parents. I would do things like go parachuting, abseiling, throwing myself off cliffs, going shark diving, surfing was my favorite sport. And my parents would be horrified. They'd be thinking, this guy's going to be dead by before he gets to, 21. But there were things that I wanted to experience. I maybe unconsciously, I thought that maybe somewhere in my life I'm going to be helping other people to get out of their prison.
Yeah, really testing those limits. I was the same. I was doing that, but I fell off a cliff at 15.
Oh,
So
wow.
from abseiling.
Oh, you were
That's about
abseiling, you
it.
fell off a cliff.
Yeah.
Wow, did you would have hurt yourself, yeah.
Yeah. And I'd actually only just broke my scaphoid bone in my hand, but
Wow. Is
what
that all?
the hospital said because I was hot and I took my jumper off and wrapped it around my waist. that saved me from spinal injury. And then it also saved me because as the jumper was, as I was rolling down the cliff in Mount Victoria towards a 200-foot drop, the vines and all the stuff tangled around the jumper and my legs and actually held me in place before I fell any further.
Wow.
But I was doing the same thing. I was testing my limits as well. Yeah. And I think I love how you framed you wanted to do the opposite action of what was going on. And I really can relate to that in my own upbringing, that I definitely wanted, all I experienced in life was hatred and couldn't, but all I wanted was love. All I wanted to send out was love, but I had to discover, well, what is that first? So I think, yeah, it's really discovering those unconscious patterns are really important. Is that why you went into neuroscience and understanding the world better?
Yeah, from when I was very, very young, at 7, my best friend was a library card. And the reason my best friend was a library card was because the bullies didn't go to the library and it was a safe place. And I spent a lot of my time in the children's section, loving the color and and the animation of characters and reading stories. I fell in love with Dr. Seuss and, all his books and so many other books. I just love books. And I got bored with the kids' books, after about 6 or so months. And just around the corner, there was a psychology section. And I grabbed a couple of books out of there and went to the kids section and took my psych books and started reading. And it was the first time that I started to realize that you're not stuck with your lot, whatever is your DNA or your genetics or even your modeling. You're not stuck with that because there were books that started talking about different ways of thinking. So those things gave me a lot of hope, and I never stopped reading. I read all through my life, but it really wasn't until I was 40 and I'd broken up in a relationship that I had been in for about 10 years. And I'd realized that I hadn't actually found me. In all of those 40 years, I really hadn't found me. And I didn't really know who I was. And I was horrified when I discovered that I didn't know who I was. So I went on an absolute bender to really find out who I was. So I studied life coaching, and that was the first thing that I studied. And I remember I did it with my best friend, and we were so naughty in these classes that they had to separate us. We were having so much fun, and I said to him, I said, I have found home. This is my home. This is my language. These are my people. This is where I live. And I can remember another buddy of mine through the coaching, a lady named Sue. She said, "Hey, I'm going to this big NLP seminar at the weekend. Do you want to come?" And I went, "Oh, yeah." So I went to this seminar. And before this guy had finished, I already had in my mind, I was going the whole way. I was signing up for the whole program. And I signed up to become a trainer, actually, of NLP. And I had no intention of being a trainer, but I loved it so much. I had a horrible moment before it. I fell in love, and I met this wonderful lady, and we ended up getting married. Pretty quickly, we had our first child. And my wife, Rebecca, she said to me, she said, I hate to tell you this, but we're down to $27. That's it. That's all we've got in the bank. And I had a $70,000 credit card bill, a mortgage that was pretty new. And I thought, oh my God, here I am. I'm going to be homeless. So I will discover who I am. I am homeless. And so the thing was, I went into my training, straight into my training, and I thought, it's all my money stuff. That's what's put me here. That's why I'm in this position. I've got to take responsibility for it. I've got no one to blame but myself. And so I got a coach who was NLP trained, and I made sure that he was an NLP master. And I said, I need to change at the money level. So he started working with me, and I was working in a sales job only because I was scared of sales. I took this job. And so I got into this sales job, and here I am in this sales job. And I was the worst salesperson in the history of this company, so the sales director told me. And I was about to lose my job, and down to $27 in my bank account. And I started using what I'd learned and how I'd been coached. And I remember one day, before I walked into my office, I said, today I'm going in there as a different person. I am no longer Rik Schnabel version 1. I'm going in there as Rik Schnabel version 2. And I pretended that I was a billionaire, well, actually not billionaire, millionaire, and I imagined that I had $13 million in my bank account. Why I picked 13 million? No idea. But I thought to myself, how would I be feeling right now if I had $13 million in my bank account? And I thought, I'd be feeling great. Like I'd be feeling, hey, I can do anything. And the weirdest thing happened. My phone rang, which it never did. No one called me to give me orders. And my phone rang, and it shocked me. And I picked up the phone, and that one phone call, I earned half a year's salary. Just one phone call, bang! All my, well, half, almost my financial issues almost disappeared. But I did it again. I went through the whole process again. I used all my NLP skills, and my phone rang again. I picked it up. I got another order, and the difference between the first and the second was only $1,000. There was only $1,000 difference from call number one, call number two. And now I've got a whole year's income out of two phone calls. All my debts are gone. And mind you, I've got to wait 30 days until I get my commissions. But the thing that I thought is, I thought to myself, those amounts are so similar that perhaps I've put a limit on them too. So I did it again, but this time I thought, what would it be like if I could take the top off this? What if I pull out all limits? The phone rang again. This time I earned the sum total of the two amounts together. So it was double. And so in three phone calls, I've now got 2 years' income. Didn't stop there, it just kept going. And all of a sudden, my annual salary actually turned into my monthly salary. And I was looking at spreadsheets and I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to be earning, like, my annual salary wasn't that great. But I'm thinking to myself, I'm going to earn $85,000 this month. And I'm thinking, whoa, $85,000. And next month I had about 60,000 in the can. And the month after I had about 30,000. And so it went. And those amounts just got bigger and bigger as time went on. And I began to realize that I had so many limitations on the monetary stuff and what I could do. And I began to realize that you can change literally, you can literally change overnight. Of course, that's the mindset piece. But of course, you've got to have structure as well. You've got to have a vehicle in which to be able to make money. Like I'm not a believer of The Secret. I do believe, like, my very first book was kind of in the lines of The Secret. It's called A Richer Way to Think. But
as in the law of attraction.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But the law of attraction, from The Secret's perspective, it actually had people thinking that they could just meditate on their couch and their bank manager
Yeah.
would walk in with a briefcase and go, "Oh, was this your order?" And of course, practically that created polarities in people's thinking. People thought, that's ridiculous, that can't happen. And then there were others who thought it could, which equally was ridiculous to some degree. But the universe really needs a bank. It needs a place to put that money. And you have to have logical understanding of how you're going to actually make that money. So you've got to have a job or a business, or you've got to have, even something valuable in your life that you can sell, or there's got to be the tangible elements that need to click in order for that to happen, in my mind.
But in anything, so there's a lot of self-limiting factors that we put in over ourselves in life in different things. I mean, I don't think we can learn a lot about ourselves from money only. Like, it has to come from our purpose, our passion, what we do, and I certainly believe in what we put out into the world. What if we put out negative thoughts, we're going to have negative thoughts. If we put out positive thoughts about ourselves, then we're, as you said, taking off that limit from ourselves, and we're really going to boost more into those positive things. If we feel like we're going to have a bad day because we woke up and rolled out of bed and did all that, and we continued that cycle will continue. So I
Yeah.
think that's sort of like around the same sort of thing. But let's just try rewind a little bit on some people who may never have heard of NLP or Neuro-Linguistic Programming. Is that right?
That's it.
Yeah. What just in a small way, like, what does that actually mean? What is that? A summary of the training that you've done, what you offer people.
Neuro-linguistic programming is a big, big topic. I just finished a book, which is actually only part one of four books, and it's an A4 book that's 550 pages. So, it, by the way, is now the biggest transformational book on the planet ever published. So it's huge. It's a really big book. But to simplify, Neuro-linguistic programming, really at the end of the day, is I hear a lot of people say, I don't know what NLP is, or I'm not doing NLP. And my answer to that is, yes, you are. You are doing NLP every second of your day. NLP is essentially consciously bringing metacognition into our lives. In other words, metacognition is knowing the thinking underneath the thinking. Actually, you were really good at this at the very beginning of today. You were talking about your awarenesses from my stories. You were saying, "Oh yeah, I can see how you came to believe that because you had a military type style of parenting, which is very perceptive of you, I got to say." So the thing is that NLP is really starting to understand, how do I get the results that I get in my life? What is the thinking behind those results? So, right down to a kid in class that puts up their hand, there's going to be kids that put up their hand, but there's also going to be a whole bunch of kids that won't put up their hand. And both are going to have reasons. The kid who puts up their hand might be the kid that is really looking for acknowledgement, or really looking to be categorized as clever or smart, or is competitive. There's a motive just as much as there is motive underneath all the kids who go, "No way, Jose, I'm not putting up my hand." And their motive might be, I don't want to stand out. I don't want to look foolish. I don't want people to laugh at me, and they equally
I
have
don't
their
want to get it
motives.
wrong.
Exactly. So the reason that I became so passionate about NLP is I've studied so many things, but NLP has some really good base to it. because it comes from an area of psychology. So it's what I would call positive psychology. It doesn't go into the dark corridors that psychology will often go into. It tends to have more of a positive focus on psychology. And so what it does is, in essence, if you're coaching using NLP, what you'll do is someone will say to you, I'm not confident enough to get up and be a speaker, or I've got to speak, at a conference and I'm scared as hell, and then they're saying to you, I don't want to be scared as hell. I actually want to be able to do that, but I want to do it confidently and I want to sound professional. So now I've got to think to myself, okay, so what is causing the behavior? What is causing the fear? So typically what I've got to try to do is I've got to go back into their brain and I've got to get their brain to spit it out, and it's going to spit it out in a reverse of their senses. What they saw, what they heard, what they felt, what they said to themselves, what they smelt, what they tasted. And so I'm going to go back to when they decided they weren't confident. And they might, say something like, I was 7 years old. I put my hand up in class and people said, you're an idiot or dumb, wrong answer, etc. That became a negative experience. Now, what then happens, negative experiences are not just negative experiences. What they are is they're sensory. We see people laughing at us. We hear them laughing at us. We feel this feeling in our body, like our body wants to go into a hole, and it becomes like a tightly wound neural network that all connects together, and it goes into our neurology, and it says, okay, don't ever put yourself in that position again. That didn't work out so well. So then that person has a neurological connection that says avoid standing out. So now you've got to work with that person and you've got to transverse that trauma, take trauma out of trauma and take it into a positive realm. Find some level of positivity, because the brain pretty much can be very black and white. It's not often shades of gray. Something's good or it's bad. And so what you then do is go into that trauma, and if that trauma can then turn into good, then that problem disappears. That neurological connection is altered. And so a person can then see themselves on stage. Now the rest of the deal is give them the skills. Now they're willing. The one thing that we've got to understand about people is we are given a gift at birth. That's called free will. We can live the shittiest life on the planet if we want, or we can live the best. But it's a decision. And it's our free will. So you've got to always work with people's free will. You never work against their free will. If a person wants to be depressed, and there's benefit in being depressed, then you let them. It's not our job to change everybody. It's people's job to come to us and say, I'm not happy with my life. I want a different one. And then we've got to work out why their life is like it is.
Do you find that a lot of people talk about it from their perspective of now, like this is happening in my life now, but what you actually unravel is something that is straight back into their upbringing, their childhood? It's all stemmed from something younger?
All the time. I would say without a shadow of a doubt, like there was a lady I was working with today. She's a trader. I work a lot with people who are trading on the stock market, and I help them get better at it so they can make more money. And she wants to do that, but her problem is she's got to learn the skill. Now, she's learning the skill, but in learning the skill, she goes into classes with other people. And some of them are doing incredibly well and going, hey, I've made my first million, and others are kind of going, hey, I just made 120,000 last week. And she's going, oh my God, I haven't done anything, I'm doing badly or whatever. So there's that comparison piece. And today I helped her with that. And she said, I feel like I'm always being judged. And I said, well, you feel like you're being judged because you're judging yourself. And you're judging yourself because you've been taught to judge yourself. Probably your mother, father, or other did exactly that to you. And she goes, how did you know that? you know. And so what we did is today we went into a process, and what I call it is turning pain into purpose. You grab your pain and go, okay, what's the purpose of that pain? Sometimes the purpose of pain is just to learn to heal. So I worked with her on that, and I said at the very end, we actually, I'm just going to kind of go to the side slightly without giving her name away. I'm just going to talk about what we measured. Judgment. We measured judgment. And I said, 0 is no judgment. 100 is 100% judgment. Where are you? She said she was 70. By the time we finished our process and I calibrated her at the end, I said, where is judgment for you now based on that old scale? 0, no judgment, 100% judgment. Where are you now? And she said, I'm at 10. And I said, awesome. So you've gone from 70% to 10%. She said, yeah. She said, I get it. I totally get it. It's projections. It's all projections. People were projecting on me. And hey, I'm free of that. So people can shift. The thing I love about NLP is people can shift really fast, as long as they're willing. Because I said to her, I said, look, I'll be honest with you. We're going to go in a dark place. We're going to go visit your dark places. But understand, we're going to do that in a safe way. And we're also you're going to feel lighter. At the end of each of our processes, we're just going to keep peeling these onion rings off until you're completely free. So
were you doing that with someone else before you started being a coach? Were you in your training? Did you have that NLP master doing that sort of things on yourself so that you're learning those unconscious patterns in you and changing them? That was all part of your story.
yeah, well, the thing I love about NLP training is you can't you can't just sit and read a book about it. Like, yes, you can read a book about it, but one of my mentors used to always quote a Chinese proverb to me, and with repetition, he drilled it right into my head. And that is, to know and not yet to do is not yet to know. And I love that Chinese proverb. Books are great, and I'm a big lover of books. But books typically, really, if you think about, particularly in the self-help, department of books, they are for you to go, okay, so what am I going to do differently as a result of reading this book now? And it's not just about having it in your head, it's applying it. So, knowledge within itself is not valuable at all. Application of knowledge is where the value kicks in. So NLP, you can't really learn it without actually having it done to you and you doing it to somebody else who's willing. So what happens, like when we get our people through our courses, I usually say, okay, guys, let's create an environment of care, consideration, kindness, and respect. Let's respect everyone here, because you're going to be going into breakout rooms and you're going to be working on some very personal stuff. Please keep it in the room. Don't come out and go, oh, blah, blah, blah has this issue or problem. And by the way, even though they had the problem, the whole purpose is to get rid of the problem. So through that, typically people, like, for example, I'll be teaching beliefs. What are they really? Where do they sit in our brain? How do they engage? How do they get triggered? And how do we learn them in the first place? And then I'll talk about it from a very theoretical type perspective, and I'll bring science into it and case histories and stuff like that. But then I'll say, okay, I'm going to show you how quickly you can turn someone's belief around. And one of the experiences that we do is we say, look, bring a food or a drink that you love, that you can't get stopped drinking or eating, and I'll show you how with one technique you can stop drinking that or eating that for good, forever. And it's a real powerful, powerful demonstration. So, so people say, I want to stop eating chocolate. I want to stop eating, crisps or chips or whatever. And so we do this technique. And so then I say, okay, so I need a demonstration. I need someone who wants to get rid of at least two things. And then that person will say, yeah, that'll be me. I want to stop drinking Coca-Cola. So the way that we actually work, the way that we think, is they're based on how we came to think about those things in the first place. What we saw, heard, spoke of, spoke in our head, felt, smelled, tasted. Our senses. So under the senses, there are things called submodalities. So the submodalities are like, if you think of an ideal holiday that you want to have, you will get a picture of that in your head, and it will be either color or black and white. It'll be near or far away from you. It will be a size, a particular size of picture. It'll be three-dimensional, or it'll be flat. It'll be panoramic, or it'll be framed. These are submodalities. So once you understand these submodalities, what you can do is you can tamper with them. And when you tamper with them, a color picture, turn it to black and white, is going to change the experience. It's going to change how you feel about it. And what happens is it's also going to change your neurology. So it's actually going to change your brain when you change pictures. So then we demonstrate how quickly a person shifts, and then we send them into a breakout room and say, okay, one person's going to be a coach, one person's going to be a client, do the process, and then swap. So you get the experience in both ways.
I did that as you were talking about it. And I pictured my favorite beach in my full color panoramic, like, because I'm very visual.
Yeah.
I dream big movie stuff. And then as soon as I turned it to black and white, it was like this, it's drizzling and raining in Sydney today. It was like, oh my goodness, I don't want to go there. It's like awful weather like here.
Yeah.
It's like
it does.
incredible. It just in a second, as soon as you said that, it just changed.
It changes the experience entirely. It really, really does. The thing that happens is when you're working with people and you're getting them to imagine different things, those submodalities are changing instantly. Just by you taking a different perspective on things. It's a little bit like someone who's depressed, for example. The thing that I learned, I can remember writing it down on my notepad, and I thought this is going to be very important. But I didn't know how important. I just got a sense that this is big information. And the information that I was given is that every single memory that we have actually has a linked state. So every memory has a linked state. We either feel good, bad, excited, joyful, expectant, exhilarated, low, depressed, sad. Every single memory has this. So this made me realize that you can do a lot once you understand how the brain works. For example, I've worked with a lot of people who think they're dumb, and they don't think they're that intelligent, and that's the problem. They can't really seem to learn. They've gone off and done some adult education, or gone off and done a degree or something, and they're struggling because their identity thinks they're unintelligent, and they'll put a word to that. So what I typically do, the way that I usually start when I start working with someone like that, is I'll say, when did you decide that? And they'll look at me blankly. And they go, I don't know. I didn't think it was a decision. I didn't think I'd made a decision at some point. And then I would say, yes, you did. Let's find out when you did it, why you did it, and let's see whether it was the best decision at the time. And so what you can then do, again, you go back into their past and you'll find a time that they just felt a little dumb in class. Usually they'll go back to primary school, in most cases, sometimes high school. But I can always remember this one kid. I was doing a talk about intelligence and memory and all this sort of stuff at a school. And this kid came up to me in the break, and one thing that I love with NLP, or another thing, is you learn to read people and everything. Watch the color of skin change, eye pupils change, gestures, mouth going up, down, etc., frowns, lines on face, lines on lips. They all mean things. And I could see that he was walking toward me and his face was down. So his chin was down. But it was down not far enough. He could still look at me, but he was looking from the top of his eyes. And he came towards me and I immediately knew he had low self-esteem going on in that moment. And he said to me, he said, "Thank you for your talk. It's really highlighted a lot of things to me, but you're saying that anyone can be smart. Are you sure?" you know, and I said, "Okay, come on, spit it out." I said, "You think you're dumb, or you think you're dumb in a particular," and he goes, "Oh, is it that obvious?" And I said to him, "So tell me, where do you think you're dumb?" And he said, "Oh, I'm really struggling with commerce." And I said, "Okay, let me ask you one question. Do you enjoy commerce?" And he said, "No, I hate it." I said, "There's your answer." I said, "You're not dumb. You're just not interested. That's all." When you become interested in things, you will go deeper, further, research longer than anyone when you're interested. And I said, "Just do you have to do commerce? Can you just go into another course?" And he said, "Yeah, I can." I said, "Well, I'd highly recommend you do it, because if you're going to use commerce as a base for anything you're going to do in a career, I guarantee you that career is not going to be all that great either." And he said, "Yeah, but my dad," I said, here we go. I said, "Stop the projections. Just because your dad wants you to be this person doesn't mean you should. Work out what your values are, work out what's important to you, and work out what your interests are. And you should never have to work a day in your life. You should love what you do. And if you love what you
Exactly.
do, the world's going to be a different place."
Yeah, yeah. And I think both of us have gone through that pain towards purpose. Like we've
Yeah.
rewired what we've grown out of and into a purposeful place. And I think and we both went into helping roles as well, because I did a lot of counselling in the Navy and the police force. Um, so yeah, there's a lot of importance of rewiring beliefs and systems. And so you're available as a coach, and NLP training you do in your work as well. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I never used to do as much coaching as I do now. COVID seemed to change that big time. I was doing a lot more teaching than coaching, but I was always coaching because I was always teaching coaching, and I thought it was important to keep my hand in, and keep coaching. But COVID happened, and then all of a sudden, all of these people reached out. I saw the statistics, anxiety became an epidemic. And, it went from like 30% of people around the world have experienced anxiety to 55%, I think it was. And so more and more people came to me and said, I don't like my life, or I don't like where I'm going, and so what I ended up doing is I said to the office, I said, okay, I'm going to open up. I'm going to accept a lot more clients. And they said, how many? And I said, okay, I'll accept 45 clients, and I think I was working with about 20, which was more than double. And then bang, that filled up. And then I went, okay. And I was really loving the coaching again, because it's so fulfilling when you see a person go from problem to not problem. You know what it's like. You've worked in that space. And so I said, okay, I'm going to open it up to 77. And they said, why 77? I said, I don't know. That was the first number that came to me. So I opened it up to 77. Now I think I sit on my butt for about 14 hours a day, Monday through to Thursday. Fridays I like to take off. And, so my diary is full, and it's gratifying. Though I love the teaching too, because the teaching is an opportunity to duplicate what I'm doing. And there needs to be more healers, more coaches, more counselors out there. I know people say, "Hey, there's a lot of coaches and counselors in that." I say, "Yeah, of course, you're in the environment. They're the only people you're seeing because you're learning and training." But the truth is, there's still such a shortage in those areas, and personally, I think everybody should have someone that they go to, and I don't care what that is, because, different people have different flavors towards different things, be it a Reiki healer or a coach or a counselor or a psychologist, or, whatever it might be. But I think everybody needs someone, on call that they can go to, because we all have trauma. We've all
Absolutely.
experienced bad things, and we all have goals and dreams.
Absolutely. So how does Rik look after himself?
Rick looks after himself with his family. I think family is really, really important. I'm very blessed. I have two beautiful daughters, and I have a very lovely and understanding wife. We're all coaches here. We've actually, every single member of my family has been through my courses. So my oldest daughter, she came into it when she was 14. So she was the youngest, and then my youngest daughter came in when she was about 16. And they even went into my speaker training courses, which was awesome to see their confidence come out. And so my family is really good. We coach each other. We all coach each other and help each other. Um, so that's important. I think nature is also very important, particularly when you're living with a lot of technology. Like I'm in front of a computer screen for long, long, long days. And I love going in the water. I'm fortunate enough to live right near the ocean. The ocean is just outside my window there. And so being in nature, I think, is very grounding. And I think, it's something that certainly happened to me is when I had all this success, my ego got big, and I had to have a beautiful and lovely fall, so I could humble myself a bit, And I think we all kind of need that, because sometimes I'm not a big believer of thinking you're better than anybody else. I don't think that's a good way of humanity to really think, like one is up upon the other because they're, more intelligent, better looking, got more money. That's nonsense.
Yeah.
Everyone has value, and I think humanity would really benefit by us all encouraging that value out of one another. Because if we do that, we create very strong communities, and that's not gaslighting, that's really applauding and encouraging, and seeing the benefit and value. Like, here, what you're doing in this, I know you're doing this because you care about humanity and because you want to put your value out there, and also other people that you bring onto your program. And there's a lot to be said for that. That there's a lot of heart there. There's a lot of value for humanity overall.
And I think because that's a space that I see that we don't have a lot of today in this disconnected world from social media and online. And nature is my go-to as well, but it's holding space and honoring that truth for each other. And if we can connect at these particular places where if I could offer that gift in some way, then that's why I'm doing what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think nutrition too is really, really important as well. I aim to avoid alcohol mostly. I might have a beer here or a glass of wine there, but I know that alcohol doesn't really serve humanity very well. And also stay away from the middle aisles of shopping centres. I think they're putting far too many poisons in food, these days, knowingly or unknowingly.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's been so great talking to you, Rik. Like I could have a conversation with you forever. I've got so many questions still in my head, but anyway, we'll leave it there for today, and I'd really appreciate your time, and I've learned so much, and I hope that many other people will be inspired by our conversation.
Thank you, Mel. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've got such a beautiful energy, and the way in which you ask your questions, it doesn't feel like an interview. It feels like a conversation, which is always far superior. So thank you.
Yes.
This is Dr. Mel Baker, and you've been listening to Living Reflections, where truth is honoured and space is held. Until next time, may you find breath, clarity, and your own quiet